There was a time when energy companies invested token amounts of energy in alternative fuels to make themselves appear more socially responsible, a little bit more cuddlier than perhaps they would otherwise be perceived. So what's changed since then? Our next panel discussion is on energy companies and their alternative fuel strategies, and that is going to be moderated by Steve Linde, Editor-in-Chief of the Jerusalem Post. Ethan, as ever, will be my wingman here to chip in at various points, perhaps. So just if you try and look over at us every now and then. But for now, I'll hand it over to Steve to introduce today's panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, distinguished guests. I must say this is a really cool conference, and it's a pleasure and privilege to be here and to moderate this session, which is called the Energy Companies and Their Alternative Fuel Strategies. And to introduce three men who are on top of the field in their home countries. Héctor Moreira, a board member of PEMEX, obviously from Mexico. Doug Berven, the Vice President of Corporate Affairs of POET. And Daniel Recht, a leader of the Sustainability Center at OCI in the United States. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Each one of you has gained personal experience on the ground, as it were, in exploring the trend of finding alternative fuels. PEMEX focused to a large degree on oil, POET on ethanol, and OCI on methanol. So my first question to each of you is, what lessons can you share with us today about what you have learned about alternative fuel strategies from your own experience? Héctor, if we can start with you.
I have enjoyed this meeting very much. I think it has a lot of lessons for the people who attend. But I have a reflection on myself. When you say choice, choice for whom? Choice for the consumer, choice for the big consumers, or choice for the nation? And there is three levels in which you can answer the question. If you look at the first one, choice for the consumer, well, if we're going to move to a choice for the consumer, it has to be to something that is as simple as what we have now and cheaper or more efficient. If it's choice for the big consumers, then it's simpler because there's fewer, they move more for profit-oriented decisions, and also they're more ready to invest. And the third one is choice for the government, which is far more difficult because that implies two things which I think are happening in Mexico. One of them is investment. Where are you going to get the money that the new choices require? And second, you have to change the institutions, you have to change the laws, you have to change all the way that this sector operates. And that's happening in Mexico. I mean, this choice has taken the Mexican to have to change the energy law.
Doug, what can you tell us?
You know, I started with POET maybe not quite 11 years ago. And at that time, ethanol was a little-known commodity. It was maybe 2% of the U.S. fuel supply. It was the darling of everybody from the oil industry to us ethanol producers to the consumers. And over the last several years, as we've gone from 1 or 2% of the fuel supply, we're now 10% of U.S. fuel supply, looking to go to 15 and 30% of the U.S. fuel supply. Somewhere along the way, we lost our darling status because we were starting to cut into market share of the oil industry. And we have been the target of campaigns to stop our growth. Everything from food versus fuel to energy balance to you name it. We have all of these manufactured arguments against us. And right now, we're in a situation where the oil industry has kind of drawn a line in the sand in America and said 10% is your market share. That's it. They happen to be our customers. They also happen to be our competitors. And so, you know, we've learned an awful lot along the way. Maybe the most important thing that we've learned is it's very difficult changing the energy complex in the United States, let alone the world. You're up against the most powerful political force on the planet in oil, and they will want to maintain that market share and margin and everything else. So we have a great value proposition with ethanol. That's not good enough to change the energy complex. That's what we're trying to do, and we need help to break that monopoly because if they choose not to buy our product, we can't grow. And so we're stuck in this spot right now at 10%, trying to get beyond it. And the value proposition is great, just that it's a very formidable opponent.
Daniel, you live in the same country, but I think your experience is somewhat different. Do you agree with what Doug had to say?
Well, I hate to correct you, but actually OCI does have big operations in the United States, but I'm based in South Korea, which is where our corporate headquarters is.
Okay.
But when we think about consumer fuel choices, our main contribution to renewable energy is in solar energy. And we really feel that solar and other renewable grid energies are an important component of fuel choices for both governments and consumers, because ultimately over the life cycle of any transportation technology, a huge amount of energy is going to be drawn from the grid, even if that technology at the end is burning the fuel. And so if you really think about in the big picture over the whole energy system, as many people have said over the course of this conference also, the grid now needs to be integrated into the transportation sector. When you start thinking about that, having a renewable grid is necessary to reducing the environmental impact of the transportation sector to where we want it to be. And then also, that is what you need to give consumers a meaningful fuel choice. Because ultimately, if you are switching carbon-rich fuels for a carbon-rich grid, you haven't chosen it all.
Okay. I'd like to focus in now on Israel and what advice you have for Israel, which, as you know, is undergoing a revolutionary transformation. Perhaps, again, we can start with you, Héctor.
Well, I'm very happy for Israel because it's a game change. Okay, I think like getting gas is even better than having got petroleum. In the case of Mexico, what we have now is the national strategy that says we should gasify Mexico. Okay, Mexico has huge gas deposits that we have not exploited, and the idea is we should produce all the electricity from gas, we should use gas for transportation, we should bring the gas to every industry, etc. So I think we are like mates in this trip.
Can Israel learn from the Mexican lesson?
I think we should learn from the Israeli lesson.
Okay.
I think they're further away than us in the use of natural gas.
Doug, what do you think?
Yeah, I have a fairly specific idea for Israel. In the United States, well, let me back up. We're talking about a lot of different technologies that are transformative and futuristic. And in the United States, we have about 1.5 billion gallons of oversupplied ethanol right now. It is shut down because of a blend wall. We're selling ethanol today. I checked the price yesterday. It was $1.74 a gallon. That's 113 octane fuel for $1.74 a gallon, which Israel could import that overage from the United States into this country, lower its gasoline price significantly with a cleaner, high-octane fuel. Now, that doesn't mean that Israel is stuck with anything. You continue to advance, but you can almost immediately change your oil complex in this country. And the other thing is, not only is it cleaner and less expensive, you can put 15% ethanol in every gallon in this country, and you'll eliminate the most toxic part, the aromatic component within the fuel supply here. And we've had a number of presenters talk about aromatics and PM 2.5. Ethanol can replace a lot of that, one for one. So you get a less expensive fuel, which is cleaner for the environment, better for human health, and it's readily available. You don't have to change the infrastructure in the country.
Steve, if I can just come in here. Forgive me, are there restrictions on Israel importing ethanol right now? I mean, are there tariffs on imported ethanol into Israel? I'm just wondering if... my question is to Doug. He says that there's all this surplus ethanol which Israel could buy and reduce its oil consumption. And I'm just wondering if there's anything preventing you from doing that other than the demand. Maybe there's tariffs there, I don't know.
I'm not aware of anything preventing it. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not. I'm not aware of anything that would prevent it, though. But I'm sure that, you know, if it was in the best interest of the country, they could find a way to import it here.
Daniel, Héctor called it a game changer, the huge find of natural gas off Israel's Mediterranean coast. And we've heard a concrete suggestion here. What would your advice to Israel be?
Well, unfortunately, I think my advice to Israel is that natural gas can only be a temporary solution.
Why is that?
In the end, the thing that you need to care about is carbon. Ultimately, carbon dioxide emissions worldwide will need to be reduced dramatically. And even if we switched the whole world over to natural gas, still the carbon in the atmosphere would be going up. And so I think natural gas is a great opportunity for Israel to switch to alternative fuels and have an experience with fuel choice. But ultimately, Israel, like the rest of the developed world, is going to need to move to fully renewable fuels.
Hector, you and I were talking a little bit earlier about the Mexican dream, which includes, having a car, having a house, and that's why a lot of Mexicans live outside of the big cities and drive to work. Here in Israel, we had an almost failed experiment with Better Place crashing. There's even a joke that if you want to charge an electric car battery, you should do it with a credit card, preferably one that's expired. What do you think in the field of transport does the future hold for us?
Well, my point was that when you come to this fuel decision, you're not only changing the fuel, you're not only changing the composition of the fuel basket, you're really asking the people to change the way of life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Can you talk up a little bit?
I'm sorry. You have to change the way you live. You have to change your way of life. Okay? It's easier, for instance, if we had electric public transport, but that implies like a more, concentrated population centers. We have been telling the people like the Mexican dream, which is to have your car, your house, away from the city, a very nice garden, etc. That won't be possible in the other model. So to change this new dream of conserving like energy, of producing like zero carbon, etc., implies that we have to change our way of life. And to convince people to change the way of life is not easy. It's going to take a long time. It's going to take a lot of commercials and interviews and whatever so that people can be convinced, so that it cannot be done one day to the next, because people is going to reject it. So we have to move to ethanol and methanol and things that in a way are similar to the ones we had before.
Do you have any suggestions about how we can change people's minds?
Well, I find that very difficult because we have to start by offering more things in the city and offering a much better public transportation than we have now. If you go to Mexico, you're going to find that the local public transport is crowded, it's noisy, it's dirty. So you have to invest a lot of money first in public transportation. And then that public transportation has to be made all electric, and then you can start putting all the changes at an individual level when people has already seen the system working.
Doug, is that your sense where you live in the United States? Here in Israel, we feel like there are too many cars. It's impossible to find parking. We need fewer cars on the road and not more.
Yeah, well, you're talking to a guy from South Dakota where our state is 4 times the size of Israel, and we've got 800,000 total people in the state. So most people have cars because they travel quite a long distance, and it's just, that is what we're growing up with. Parking is not an issue in South Dakota. I can guarantee you that. So, I think a lot of it is regional, it's cultural. We're trying to find the best solutions that fit the lifestyles of the people that need a change. And we have found a way with ethanol to very gradually and non-obtrusively allow a newer, greener, better product to move into the fuel stream. And in South Dakota, I was showing someone earlier on my phone, I have a picture of just a random pump that offers on one side an E20 blend, 20% ethanol, 80% petroleum. And then there's an E30 blend and an E85 blend. And then on the right-hand side, there's an 87 octane, 10% ethanol blend and an 87 octane without ethanol. Now, the 87 octane without ethanol is 50 cents more per gallon than the 87 octane with 10% ethanol. So you can imagine the people in South Dakota are buying ethanol everywhere. So we're trying to find ways to give consumers choice, and that's really what we've done, especially in South Dakota. You can buy regular unleaded gasoline if you want, but very little of it is sold in our state because most of it has some blend of ethanol.
Daniel, I mean, I didn't bring it up because I thought I was protecting you, but since you brought up the fact that you're based in Korea, tell us a little bit about relations between Israel and your company. Are there any? Do you see potential relations?
At the moment, there aren't very strong relations between our company and Israel. I think we do see potential because of Israel's incredible solar resource.
Mm-hmm.
We really feel like solar energy has hit an important transition over the past few years, that the industry has more or less settled on silicon technology, and the price of that is continuing to fall incredibly rapidly. And so we look to developed countries with really nice solar resources, so like the southwestern United States, like Israel, as areas that are really going to be at the forefront of a new solar revolution. And so where we see Israel-Korea relations is one where Korean know-how about implementing industrial technology at large scales can be brought together with Israeli technology to bring about large energy projects that really wouldn't have been imaginable even 5 years ago.
Okay, I saw you talking beforehand. Sorry, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just one for Hector, actually. Unless I misheard you, you were saying that having gas is even better than oil, yes. I think you said. In Israel, I mean, if you speak to analysts, they'll tell you oil is worth more, it's a higher value thing, and Israel is now really, really keen to find oil, now that it's got gas, as well as having all of these alternative fuel initiatives and innovations going on. I'm just wondering how you set that against what unless I misinterpreted what you said, that gas is better than oil, because a lot of people would say that, you know, Mexico's got lots of oil and that's better than gas. So,
well, oil is a very profitable business. It's going to bring Israel money. It's going to improve their balance of payment. But ultimately, you want a competitive nation, and a competitive nation is one that has cheap energy. So in the case of Mexico, the electricity that could be produced by using natural gas is about a third of the price of the electricity that you can produce through burning oil. So if we can say, let's move all the Mexican electricity production to natural gas, the price would probably go 40% of what is now. So if you can sell, I don't know, natural gas for the cement industry, the steel industry, the glass industry, and you can offer every other industry cheap electricity, I think it has more implications on the competitiveness of the nation than simply exporting oil. Okay, really oil is very nice, but it has a downside to it.
So the best scenario is you sell the oil abroad to someone else,
yes,
get the money for the country, but then let your own people get the cheaper energy from the gas.
Good, yes.
Yeah, well, to follow on that, in fact, Doug raised the prospect of exporting ethanol from the U.S., but already exports this is actually for you, Sir Hector, already exports of natural gas are crossing the border at a higher rate from the U.S. into Mexico. Yeah. I guess, what does PEMEX think about that? That's American gas being sold into Mexico.
You got to a very, how do you call it, sore point. Okay? If PEMEX were to invest money in producing natural gas, it would be less profitable than investing in oil. Okay, you can get far more money from oil than from gas. Okay, so what we're doing now is we are exploring producing oil, exporting oil, and importing natural gas from the U.S. Okay, so, but I mean, in real terms, that's a bit strange because Mexico has like as much natural gas as the U.S. So we really need to also start producing our own gas in sufficient quantities. So that's why we need an energy reform. Because if you leave it as it is now, say PEMEX has to produce oil and gas, well, it's going to produce oil. It's simply more profitable. But if you say, no, but we're going to allow private companies to produce gas, then you have both.
Can folks hear?
Are you guys hearing okay? Yes?
Yes.
I mean, you can obviously hear me, but we're having a little microphone trouble. Can everyone hear the panel. Can anyone not hear the panel? How about that? Okay, so let's just carry on. Ethan, I think you've got a... Did you have a follow-up, did you?
Well, well, only because I had a little trouble hearing too. So just to clarify, you're supportive of more gas use, but you'd like PEMEX to be producing it. Have I got that right?
What is in Congress now is a proposal to allow private companies to start into the gas business, okay? If that doesn't pass Congress, then PEMEX has to start producing gas. But my idea, it should be produced by a different company, even if still state-owned, but a different company, so that you can judge like the profit of one and the profit of the other separately. Because if you said, no, we're going to invest so much money for PEMEX, PEMEX will invest in oil, because that's what, I don't know, the financial better terms are.
And I have, if I could, I have an interesting counter from the floor, Doug, to your comment about Israel. I have a note here from Eyal which says, regarding Doug's offer, we never worked on ethanol because we never had a reliable source. We will check this offer.
There you go, the first deal of the conference.
So am I going to get an investment banking cut on this transaction here?
Actually, we've done that yesterday already.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can, I'm offering this up, not that I hope that you do this, but you can always make ethanol out of natural gas as well. So if you're importing initially to get something started, you can always work on the transitions to other sources if you want to be just domestically produced too, but we offer what I would call an immediate solution to an issue.
I was probably amiss in not introducing properly each of our panel members, but let me just tell you that Doug, among other things, has taken the initiative to actively promote renewable fuels. He works on several committees to strengthen the future of ethanol and serves as a board member on several POET biorefining plants. Whereas Héctor, who is a former Mexican cabinet minister, a board member of PEMEX, and an academic administrator with the Monterrey Institute of Technology and Higher Studies in Mexico, was appointed by the President of Mexico as an independent member of the board of PEMEX. I can't say it in Spanish. You can help me?
It's okay.
It's
PEMEX.
PEMEX in Spanish, but it's something like the Board of PETRÓLEOS Mexicanos. Mexicanos, okay. I knew I shouldn't have tried that. And ratified by the Senate. And he participates actively in the support committees of the board and is also a member of the board of PEMEX, Exploration and Production, which is PEP. And I know you're also an editor like myself, and you've co-authored a number of publications and books related to strategic studies. Daniel is a leader of the Sustainability Center at OCI. He advises the top management of a global multi-billion-dollar chemical materials and renewable energy company on how to grow their businesses by developing and producing new technologies for a sustainable future. An accomplished young materials scientist with more than 15 peer-reviewed publications, Daniel obtained his PhD in applied physics at Harvard, where he led the Harvard Energy Journal Club and helped design and teach 2 new courses on energy technology and climate science. So Doug, if you can give Daniel back the microphone, tell us how you see the future, looking globally.
Well, that's a real easy question. But more seriously, when I look at the future of energy, what I see really is a global transition that is going to be many local transitions. We are moving from a world where we have one transportation fuel, which is oil, to one where every area has its own needs and its own resources. And because the transportation costs for oil are relatively low because we've gotten good at it, but still non-trivial, we'll find that as we move to renewable transportation fuels, that different areas may have different mixes based on living patterns, based on natural resource patterns. And so I think what we're coming to is an explosion of diversity in energy. And it's going to be a very, very exciting time both for business people, policymakers, and technologists, because all of a sudden, we're moving from essentially a technical monopoly to one where the best technology for every given situation will have a chance.
Héctor, Mexico is very much invested in oil. Do you think you can kick the addiction?
No. No, you can't. Oil produces taxes that produce 40% of the national budget. Okay, so we are very heavily dependent on the oil exports. Okay, the problem we have in Mexico, and I think many nations have the same problem, is that we are going through this demographic transition. Okay, people is starting families in a rate greater than 4, people is arriving in the cities. The consumption of oil products, gasoline, is exploding. So Mexico has, I don't know, doubled the number of cars in the last 10 years. So I agree with Daniel in the sense that we need every possible source of energy. So to say we're going to abandon oil, I think it's a bit innocent, because we're going to need a lot of oil. I mean, think of Brazil, think of all the emerging nations. They're going to need lots of energy.
Doug, if we can go back to ethanol without going into details, because I'm sure you're talking to a lot of smart people who know how it can be done, how Israel can convert natural gas into ethanol. Why is ethanol better than any other alternative?
Well, we like ethanol for a number of reasons. It's inexpensive in the U.S. It's obviously domestic. We're making it out of a feedstock mainly of corn and now moving into cellulosic ethanol. But the ethanol industry was started on corn because corn was in such oversupply. And the U.S. taxpayer was subsidizing the farmer basically not to farm land. And the farmer didn't want to do that. The farmer wanted to grow crops on his land, and so farmers started building ethanol production facilities, and you know, that's what started the industry. So we like ethanol because it's one of the cheapest forms. It is the cheapest octane component as far as a fuel goes that I'm aware of on the planet. $1.74 a gallon, and you're getting 113 octane. That's an excellent octane boost. It's clean, it's healthy, it doesn't have groundwater issues, it works great in an engine. Car companies want more of it, in fact, at a higher octane level. So we aren't claiming ethanol to be the only energy source or the only fuel choice, but in America, it's the best fuel choice for us as an option to petroleum without any question. And we'd like to see more of the world get on that. If I was to think about the world in the future, as in the past, I agree with Hector, we're not going to get off of oil for a long time. But if you look back 200 years ago, there wasn't any oil. And humanity's been on this planet for a long time. I just saw that. I went to Jerusalem and Bethlehem on Monday, and there's a lot of history here. And for most of our time as humans, we haven't depended on oil. Mm-hmm. And I would say sometime in the not so distant future, we're going to look back and talk to our grandchildren, great-grandchildren about the age of oil. Remember those days, okay? Now, not saying that it's going to go away for a long time, but I think it's going to be minimized greatly with a lot of really new aggressive technologies because it has to. The United States has gone through 2 events in the last, 40 years. 1973, we had the OPEC oil embargo where the price of gasoline quadrupled on us. That was enough for the United States to form the Department of Energy for the sole purpose of reducing our dependence on foreign oil. We were importing about 30% back then. We got all the way up to importing about 60% at one point. And then we had the other event of 9/11 in 2001. In 2001, the average price of a barrel of oil was $23. That's just 12 years ago. It was $23 a barrel. Now we're happy at $100, $110 a barrel. We cannot afford another event in the world that quadruples our oil prices again. We've got to find something to solve this problem because America cannot afford $400 oil. I guarantee you that. That's why it's so important to transition into something. Talking about transition, another idea for Israel right now is to make sure that all new pump installs, every gasoline pump that is put in from here on out, be certified to blend any blend of ethanol and methanol. Be very simple. It's a level playing field. You're not telling people to change them out. You're telling them, as you change them, let's put an insurance policy in place for this country that if we have to switch like this, the pumps and the vehicles aren't an issue.
Can I follow on that, Doug? Because as a non-technical person, if you would explain to me, we were chatting earlier, the comparative advantages or disadvantages of ethanol versus methanol. and converting gas to either of those fuels? Because we've heard a lot of talk over the last day about methanol, and you just mentioned the idea of gas to ethanol. Which is better, or how do they compare?
I'm not an expert on methanol at all, but what I know about ethanol is it's working very well in the U.S. auto fleet. The U.S. auto fleet is very accepting of ethanol. They like to have a constant fuel. So it's ethanol now, they want more ethanol in the future. I think ethanol has got a higher octane component, and it's got a higher BTU component. And there are toxicity issues with methanol that I think ethanol doesn't have. That's not saying that methanol doesn't have a place. I'm not trying to minimize methanol's role, but in the United States, it's been ethanol that has won the day in the marketplace.
Perhaps let's turn it over to Daniel, because you are somewhat of an expert on methanol. Or not?
I'm afraid I'm not an expert on methanol.
Okay. But you have investigated and researched.
I'm not sure where that information
Maybe
came
I read
from.
the wrong bio.
Can I ask about OCI? And you're a silicon producer, right? Which
Right.
supplies the photovoltaic industry.
Right.
I guess my question for you, and I think it's a very good point you make about the long run being electric vehicles. But in the short run, I mean, can we honestly say that the electric vehicle option is the most cost-effective, without subsidies? I mean, certainly in the U.S., we have a nice tax credit. It helps to make the price come down. I know there's a tax differential here in Israel that makes electric vehicles more appealing. But on a pure economics basis, if you look at an EV right now versus a vehicle that would run on compressed natural gas, or perhaps it's a certain blend of methanol or whatever it is, are EVs really economic at this point?
I want to tackle your question in two ways. First, the direct part, which is an EV itself today economic? And the answer is, of course, not to the consumer, right? To the consumer, they see the price tag of the car, and a gasoline-powered car is cheaper. However, to society, I would say an EV may very well be cheaper, and I think that really underlies the motivation of governments to subsidize EVs in the first place. And then with that, it's important also to remember that a renewable grid doesn't just support carbon-free electric vehicles, but it reduces the carbon footprint of all vehicles, because there's a huge electricity input into the making of a gasoline-powered car. And then on top of that, when you switch to electricity as your motive energy, right, either because you're using it directly in your drivetrain in a battery electric vehicle, or because you've used electricity in the making of a liquid or gaseous fuel, that electricity is only as good as your grid. And so we as a solar manufacturer really think hard about life cycles, because we are criticized sometimes with saying that, a solar panel itself, the energy is clean, but the panel itself takes a lot of fossil energy to manufacture. Similarly, cars with zero tailpipe emissions may still have a large amount of emissions in their chain. And the way to fix that is to fix the grid.
And Steve, I had a question for Héctor. If I understood correct, I mean, this panel is entitled Energy Companies and Their Alternative Fuel Strategies. Most people wouldn't necessarily consider gas or oil, certainly as alternatives, let's call them traditional. So I'm just wondering whereas in the past we've seen the likes of BP, for example, making big play about it, what it used to have as its solar division. We see lovely adverts from, from ConocoPhillips, from Chevron and the likes, to saying how environmentally friendly they are and what alternatives they're getting into. I'm wondering, is PEMEX doing anything to kind of get away from oil and gas, or to do in addition to oil and gas?
Well, there is this 10% ethanol component in gasoline, okay, which is already in the U.S. and Mexico.
Sorry, Héctor, just 1 second, because we're not hearing you very well.
Maybe you need to turn it on.
It is on. So hello.
Speak a little more loudly.
Okay. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to improvise a little bit here.
It's called Israeli
Microphone doesn't
ingenuity.
seem to be working. Let's clip this onto you, and therefore we should all hear you very nicely. And I'll just put it there for now, and I'll come and get it back to you En 8 minutos.
What I was saying is that PEMEX has this requirement of 10% in gasoline, which is the same that they have in the US. Most of the initiatives to use electric public transport are really from the municipalities.
Oh, that's not
okay. Mexico City has, like, most of the public service is electric, but it's not PEMEX, it's really Mexico City government.
Okay. Doug, did you want to comment on that?
You know, what I wanted to talk about a little bit is, you know, where we're going from where we are. And hang on here.
So I'm told that this is now working, actually. So there you go. I'll take that back off you.
Okay.
And we'll carry on there, Premise.
Since we're getting low in time, I do want to let everybody know where we're at from a standpoint of cellulosic ethanol. We partnered with a major global firm called DSM, a global life sciences company, to build our first cellulosic plant. So the company that's actually doing it is called POET DSM Advanced Biofuels.
Maybe just explain to those who don't know what that is.
Sure. Cellulosic ethanol we're going to make, right now, most of the ethanol in the United States is made out of corn. Cellulosic ethanol is going to be made out of, in our case, corn stover. The leaves, the husks, the cobs of the corn plant. So we can have a farmer deliver grain and stover to two plants in the same location. Now, this is a $250 million facility that we're building right now in Emmitsburg, Iowa. It will be open the first quarter of 2014. The really interesting part of this is the bolt-on model. So we've got 200 and some odd ethanol plants out there making ethanol from corn today. We have developed a bolt-on model where you put a cellulosic plant right next to the grain-based plant. We bring in corn stover. That corn stover is transformed into ethanol. The residual of the stover is going to go into solid fuel boilers and anaerobic digesters to make energy to run the cellulosic facility as well as the grain-based facility. So you'll have two facilities there without any need for natural gas or fossil fuels to run the plants. Very self-sustaining, very green, very transformative to the industry, and a very rapid deployment. Once we make the first one work, our company has 27 plants in 7 states around the Midwest. And we intend to bolt this technology onto each one of those and license the technology to the other 200 plants. Now, we have competitors like DuPont and Abagoa, and they want to do the same thing. But that's the plan, and that's why we're looking so hard for market share. That's why we want to get to E15 and E30, and we want to export ethanol to Israel. We need more markets so we can continue the innovation to get to the next stage of ethanol development.
Hector, you were talking earlier about changing people's mindset. You certainly aren't short of corn in Mexico. Would this be something that you would consider?
Well, I really was thinking, as Doug was speaking, what about the leftovers from sugarcane after you have got all the juice out? Okay, because that's an enormous amount in Mexico. I think it's more sugarcane than leftovers from corn.
I believe they're making energy from the leftover from the sugarcane as well.
Yes, but they're only using it to burn.
Right, to power the facility. I don't know what the economics are of transforming that product versus the corn stover. So they may have a much more difficult economic model to make, you know, a liquid fuel out of than we do from corn.
But perhaps another deal could be on the cards here if something happened in Israel and your company, Doug, have already agreed to maybe do something with ethanol. Sorry,
Yeah, just to clarify on that, in fact, that's correct, that in Brazil they do use the leftover bagasse that they burn to self-generate and run their own plants. In fact, they generate enough electricity to feed it back into the grid.
Right.
But there are also companies in Brazil now which are looking at ways to use that byproduct to actually produce fuel. So that's starting to take hold. I received a fairly technical correction from the floor, which I'm going to read verbatim, which is an interesting point, which is that a listener pointed out or says that the one correction was that the output per ton of biomass input, this was talking about methanol versus ethanol, basically saying that biomethanol can be produced on a more efficient basis. They said that the newest and biggest producer of second-generation ethanol is Beta Renewables in Torino, Italy. And in fact, I believe that's a 20 million gallon liter plant. I think that's just come online. Maybe it's gallons. And it has an output of 200 kilograms of ethanol per ton of biomass input at 26.8 gigajoules per ton of ethanol. That is 5.36 gigajoules output per ton of biomass input. Now, the writer writes, the second generation biomethanol can be produced using good old-fashioned gasification with an output of 523 kilograms of methanol per ton of biomass at 19.9 gigajoules a ton of methanol. That is 10.4 gigajoules output per ton of biomass better, double that of ethanol. So that's a bit of a mouthful. The one thing I would say, and maybe someone knows this, but my understanding is that the Beta plant is a much larger scale. I don't know that that biomethanol plant is producing at nearly the same scale as the Beta plant is. Also, I'd be curious about the amount of energy overall that it took to convert that biosource into methanol.
Maybe since we're winding down, let's just give each speaker a chance to sum up here.
Doug, feel free to jump in on that one if you'd like, or take
Okay, so we have just about 2 minutes, Doug, so do you want to?
Well, first I'd like to say thanks for allowing me and Poet to be part of the conference. This has been a very good day and a half, and I am not going to try to argue with whoever that was talking about methanol, I guarantee you. Yeah. We're excited about the future of energy in America. We're excited about the future of energy around the world. It's these conferences that bring everything together and get new ideas stirred up and really bring solutions to the table. And you know, we're looking at the short term, the midterm, and the long term, and all those need to be worked on. But as I said before, we have got to find a solution to a global petroleum addiction. Not that it has to go away completely, it's not going to for a long time, but we can find near-term, midterm, long-term solutions.
Thank you very much, Hector.
Well, I'm very glad I came. I think there's lots of things here to learn. I love the presentations on new technological developments. Some of them were very, very impressive. And I think we have to learn from each other. I think the most important asset of the world is that we can share knowledge. So if you come here with an open mind, you're going to come back very satisfied.
Thank you so much. Daniel.
Yeah, I also want to just thank the conference organizers and you for really an incredibly insightful couple of days. Just building on what you just said, Hector, I think the idea of sharing knowledge is so critical to solving some of these global energy issues. We've come to a point where different countries have different industrial and energy capabilities, different resources. And now we face this global petroleum challenge. And we have in front of us an opportunity to put together all that knowledge that we have. And I spoke earlier about, you know, Korea's industrial know-how and Israel's technical know-how. And many other countries have their areas of expertise or specialty. And if we can bring that together as a global effort, we have a much, much better chance of overcoming our addiction to oil.
I think that's a really good note to end on. So I'd like to thank all three of our panelists today, and thank you all very much for a fascinating conversation. Thank you.